Okay, we are back. The Gut Club's podcast. I think this is like our eighth installment. Who's counting? We're back again with Steven Wright from Healthy Gut. Steven, it's an honor and a pleasure to have you back. We're maybe we need to stop meeting like this because we don't want to inspire people to learn about natural immunity or I remember when it was not called natural immunity, but the reciprocal relationship between our microbiota and our host cells. This is not our intent. We're here to sell products, right? So welcome back. Maybe we'll inspire people to rebel against the medical, military, industrial complex, but that's not why we're here. Again, that's not the Gut Club's, modus operandi. Is that the term? Welcome back, Stephen. Where are you today?
Thanks, Keith. I'm in Northern California at the moment. Okay. Obviously I didn't put in my coffee, whatever you have today. So okay. I got to get up to speed here.
Okay.
I'm more in the Zen area of, build something so good that we absorb the good stuff from the medical complex and transcend and include it.
Beautiful. I'm all about inclusion. Some of my best friends will tell you that, maybe inclusion to a fault. I'm loyal to a fault, but that's okay. No regrets.
No. And I think I think what's fun about you and fun about these conversations is that we are literally learning from each other live. We're exploring topics that I'm not sure other people are exploring on the earth. Maybe there's a few researchers in a few labs, but they don't, I don't know who they are, and they don't seem to talk publicly about this stuff. And so the beautiful thing about the pandemic and everything is that we now know that immunity and the immune system is multitudes of orders of magnitude larger and more complex and interesting than what we thought prior, I think.
Yeah. I think we're still on a long road toward what I call connecting with the web of life. I just saw 46 experts last week sign off on a paper claiming that the fetal gut is sterile. And there's plenty of evidence that it's not. But they're claiming that it's a matter of contamination. And they seem to be boastful about this idea. So that's one of the battlefields, actually, the fetal intestine and whether or not it's sterile. What a fascinating subject,
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the next decade of our lives here is how do we make sense of what's being published in the world? Because even the published papers sometimes are fraudulent. And those of us who are just trying to create the best health we can for ourselves, for our family members, for our dogs, our cats, whatever, our animals and, horses, how do we make sense of this? You got some people saying that the gut is sterile. There's a lot of decades of research that suggests it's not.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, some of the papers about microbes translocating from the vaginal microbiome to the uterus is fascinating. In fact, just the week before last, we did a podcast about the vaginal microbiome. Today, we're going to be talking about paraprobiotics, which actually dovetails quite nicely with that subject because there are paraprobiotics, which are dead bacteria we're going to be talking about today. I like to say even dead bacteria are good bacteria and maybe better in some ways. In fact, when it comes to, the subject of the fetal gut, one of the major issues is necrotizing enterocolitis with, NEC with preterm infants. Well, I've recently found research suggesting that paraprobiotics, as opposed to probiotics, may be a safer route in that situation to prevent NEC. What a fascinating subject. I
mean, I think I actually think that's going to play out. I think for the very young and the very old who both have the most suppressed and most usually messed up gut microbiome GALT system and then the immune system, I think it's starting to play out that the safer option will end up being paraprobiotics for those populations.
It's fascinating. And, people have been poo-pooing the idea that live probiotics, don't survive gastric acid. Well, there's an argument that we can develop that suggests that maybe that's a good thing. I mean, what's your view on that?
Yeah, I get real angry at the marketers of the world, and I understand that I very much am marketing right now, and I'm always
Mhm.
marketing about what I believe in and what I found and what I like. But I get really mad at the ones who don't characterize the science correctly, and the majority of research, like 95 or 99% of all research done on probiotics, has been done on situations in which the gut would have killed some or most of the live bacteria as they went through the stomach. In other words, they didn't put them in enteric capsulation. They didn't put them in gastro-resistant capsules. And so those probiotics, like the majority of all research done, basically delivers some live component and some dead component.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Now, there are certain species, such as spore formers, who are extremely resistant to harsh situations like acid. So, speaking of non-harsh survivors, the majority of that research, we have no real clue what percentage was dead and what percentage was alive.
Wow. You know, people, do shovel in a lot of fermented food. That's, of course, live bacteria. And that stems from the age where there was no refrigeration. But there's also a history of cooking fermented foods. I mean, one of them is a staple that I've had in the Polish diet. It's sauerkraut soup. So in a sense, people are manufacturing their own paraprobiotics when they're cooking. I mean, I use our kefir uh, that we're making. We market kefir grains, and it's called Ketosana kefir grains. The kefir can be used in cooking, so I like to think I'm manufacturing paraprobiotics in the cooking process. But there's a difference, because in paraprobiotics, and this is what we want to talk about today, what they are exactly are the cell membranes. And it's basically heat killing and also leading to almost permeability and explosion, um, of the membrane. I mean, maybe the cooking process doesn't do that. I'm not exactly sure, but there are other ways to go about it. There are several ways to make paraprobiotics. What's your take on this? One of the areas is microbial lysates we're going to be talking about. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, I think so in this case, I think we're using microbial lysates as a catch-all term for what happens when you explode a cell, and like all the parts and pieces that are left over. I would guess, because remember, you might not remember because I don't think we've talked about it, but I started my working life in automotive manufacturing, and so I worked for 6 years in various plants, and so I've seen manufacturing at scale. And in order for you to produce some of these heat-killed probiotics or paraprobiotics, it's a much smaller, much more controlled manufacturing process. But in the manufacturing process, there's always trade-offs, and there's always things that happen. And so, for instance, inside of Holoimmune, I have not asked the companies, hey, do you even measure what percentage of these paraprobiotics are lysates versus viable dead cell, intact cells? Like, I don't know if they measure that. I assume they have. I don't know that they've publicly stated it. But you're right. We could be, certain strains could be all lysates and they could be producing an amazing result, and certain strains could be all intact cell walls and producing a different result. And until we get some more clarity here, we'll have no idea. But why don't you, kind of bring up and talk me through what you're thinking about lysates, because you were getting really excited before we got going, or before we started recording here, about the various
yeah,
components that make up the cell.
yeah. Let's get into that in a second. First, I want to show people the product, Holoimmune. I don't know why I say Holoimmune. I've been through 2 bottles myself, Stephen, so far, and I need to order. I've become a believer. So, I've noticed, as I mentioned earlier, that when I use them, it seems to help my breathing. which is something I didn't expect. So I think there's actually science behind how a paraprobiotic can reduce inflammation of the respiratory tract. Interesting stuff. So we're a proud affiliate of Steven's company, Healthy Gut, and we'll have a link below the video so people can go and take advantage of our discount code and also get free shipping involved. So, Steven, you've put together so many cool products as with Healthy Gut. Before we launch into our discussion of lysates and the cell membrane, I just want to, again, thank you for leading the way. I mean, you're almost, you have the name Wright. It reminds me of the Wright brothers, of course. Is there any relationship there, by the way?
No, not that I know of. But if only I could be as inventive as them and as funny as the other Steven Wright, then I'd be having a pretty awesome life.
Oh, I didn't even think about the other Steven Wright. Yeah, I would aspire to be more like the Wright brothers. That's really more up your alley and resembles what you've done. I mean, you've been very innovative. Some of these products that you're putting out are pretty cool. Tributyrin X is another one, a form of butyrate that we've been promoting. So anyway, thank you very much for all your work. Why don't we get into, why don't I share a screen now and we'll start getting into some of the science and have a little bit of back and forth. Okay, this is on the Gut Club Facebook page. It's today's main photo hub, information hub. And I started, realizing how important lysates were when I remembered that the research out of MIT back in 2014, and even 2017, some important papers, Susan Erdman at MIT was finding that microbial lysates, particularly from lactobacillus reuteri, that was found to raise oxytocin receptors in the brain by way of the vagus nerve. That's pretty profound. And so I started wondering if what she was actually using could be construed as a paraprobiotic, and sure enough, it can be. I mean, it's a microbial lysate. And, we're talking here in this paper, this is actually from a review, Paraprobiotics and Postbiotics of Probiotic Lactobacilli, their positive effects on the host and action mechanisms. It's a 2020 review. I was drawn to this photo because it's actually representing the cell surface of lactobacilli. And I believe scientists now have the ability to separate out these factors that are associated with several different mechanisms in improving health. I mean, there may be a way to separate out, there are ways rather, to separate out things like exopolysaccharides. Have you ever researched exopolysaccharides, EPS?
No, I hadn't heard of them until I was looking at this a few days ago.
Okay. Yeah, there's a whole body of research about this. In particular, I've seen lactobacillus and bifidobacteria, EPS, cross-feeding other bacteria, for instance, like Bacteroides. But there's also EPS in butyrate-producing bacteria, like F. prausnitzii is known to have EPS as well. So that's a pretty important part of the cell wall. Of course, there's the peptidoglycan from lactobacillus, and that's a part of all gram-positive bacteria. There's LTA, lipoteichoic acid. And these things are all associated with different types of immune response. In this particular paper, they break it down into 4 different areas. 1, immunomodulatory effects. 2, antagonistic effects against pathogens. 3, anti-tumor effects. And 4, preservation of intestinal barrier. So this is what the cell wall, this is really defining natural immunity. It's this reciprocal relationship between our microbes and our own host cells. Pretty
Yeah,
amazing.
I think, and when I look at this, in full disclosure, Keith is, significantly beyond my understanding at the micro, what's the right word for that? But the micro aspects of the cell and the cell receptors and things like that. But when I see this, what it tells me is that we still have no freaking clue at some level. Like, while we might be able to spin apart all these aspects, there must be, I don't know, 15, 16 variables here that we would have to spin apart, and we're going to have to study in the next decade to try to figure out which of these, which of these things matter, which of these things do what. And until then, I think one of the things that you bring up a lot, Keith, at the Gut Club is like returning to balance within nature and returning to food, and sort of like centuries old wisdom, and like, how do we apply science and new technology across that field. And I think what you see here is that one of the ways in which paraprobiotics, I believe, you can summarize what they're doing, is they're increasing tolerance to the world. And if we boost a certain bacteria type, we get a explosion of 100 or 1,000x or 10,000x of that specific bacteria's EPS, or some of those acid components or those receptor components. And that causes changes in the immune system that increase the tolerance in relation to those specific compounds. And I think that's what happens when we eat fermented foods. Like you said, we cook with them. And I think it's just really exciting that we're getting more clarity on this. And I find it to be the more we dig into this, the more I'm like, we are decades and decades away from understanding this stuff.
Yeah, you use the word tolerance. That's one of the key areas in how lactobacilli are able to help us tolerate fungi. And there are paraprobiotic studies about this. Some of them are actually inclusive of the vaginal microbiome. It's through the AHR pathway, where it's dietary tryptophan that's utilized by lactobacilli to be able to signal this pathway. I think it's called the aryl hydrocarbon pathway, and it ends up raising IL-22, which controls fungi. That's pretty cool. And this is actually found in one of the paraprobiotic papers as well. Dead fragments of lactobacillus were able to control fungi through this pathway. Pretty amazing. I mean, very, very cool. So, other areas that we can talk about are things like skin health. And I was amazed to find research about paraprobiotics raising hyaluronic acid in particular. And then this morning you sent me a study that one of the strains in Holoimmune was found to increase hyaluronic acid, which is a ubiquitous substance in our bodies. I mean, get this, Stephen. It actually is known to be 80% of the fluid in our eyeballs.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. It's known to be about wound repair. But what is really, coming to the forefront in the research that I've been tracking down is how it helps with the gut. It's lowering pathogens by activating things like TLR4. I've seen that in the literature. It's helping with leaky gut. And I think I mentioned this on other podcasts, but I was using hyaluronic acid on our dog back in 2009, 2010, before sleep, to keep her seizure free overnight. We had battling epilepsy. And, I was inspired to learn about hyaluronic acid because I found some research about how it helped with scarring. And then I saw some research about scarring in the intestine in the lacteals. That's the Peyer's patches of the intestines, is related to seizure activity. So I put two and two together, and lo and behold, it worked. I mean, hyaluronic acid really worked. I use hyaluronic acid myself, maybe a couple times a month or so before bed, and you end up getting incredible sleep from it. Another area of hyaluronic acid is Okinawan sweet potatoes. I have a couple here. I just bought these. I've got a couple more. These are known to be, by weight, leading, the way in the Okinawan diet of the 1800s, like 90% by weight of their diet associated with longevity. And it's thought that the mechanism was raising hyaluronic acid. So now you have hyaluronic acid being produced from, bacteria, but also coxcombs, chicken combs, that rubbery part on the head of a rooster. That's what is used to make hyaluronic acid.
And do you think when it comes to those sweet potatoes that it's the polyphenol content, the purple content of them? Is it causing is the starch granules causing a bloom in certain microbiome species? What do you think there?
I need to learn more about the nitty gritty about how, the hyaluronic acid is actually increased, whether it be through prebiotics, so live bacteria consuming Okinawan sweet potato, for instance, and resulting in raised hyaluronic acid, or might it be the cell wall? Given that we know paraprobiotics can also raise HA, as it's known.
Yeah, I mean the study you sent over was Lactobacillus Plantarium K8, and the strain that's in Holoimmune is Lactobacillus Plantarum 137. Or HK 137. And so I find it interesting that they're both Lactobacillus plantarum strains. And I wonder what's going to come out in the next few years regarding, will there be other strains inside of Lactobacillus plantarum? Will there be other species that seem to raise this hyaluronic acid? The study that the HK 137 group did was on dry skin in humans, and they found some percentage of the people had an improvement in their dry skin. And then part of that was water retention in the skin related to hyaluronic acid increase. And I find that, like, if we use the skin as a metaphor, I find that fascinating because I've never really dug deep into hyaluronic acid in regards to, if the skin is akin to the gut, what is hyaluronic acid doing at our membrane in the gut, and how might an increase in water be beneficial at a different level, but similarly in the gut? Like, what is the corollary there?
Yeah. Well, anyway, I was just floored to learn that dead bacteria have this capability as well. And lactobacillus in general, I mean, your Holoimmune is 3 different lactobacillus probiotics that have been heat killed. There are various ways of producing paraprobiotics, though. I mean, there's use of enzymes like lysozyme, so that that's lysis, that relates to lysates. And I think there are a few other ways that laboratories can produce paraprobiotics. Do you have any inkling about how those are made in Holoimmune?
I'll have to double check, but I think at least 2 of the 3 are steam killed, or like just they're heated with steam as they go across the line. I believe one of the 3, the plasma, the LC plasma or the amuse, it's called. The funny thing about researching these strains is they name them different things over time as different researchers and companies discover them and buy them out and things like that. But the amuse strain, I believe, is actually an immature cell, versus the L92 and the HK 137 or the LP20 are full adult cells. So I think that's the other interesting thing, is that they're also killing them potentially earlier in their life cycle in order to beneficially increase certain aspects of those cell membranes that we talked about earlier. So I find that fascinating. I wonder, I just wonder how we can further along this research. I mean, I think what you spoke to earlier with the Holoimmune customers, and I'm still trying to track this all down, and with your help, I'm getting closer. We have a growing group of, it's usually women. It doesn't have to be, but it just seems to be that those are the people reaching out and letting me know, who are taking anywhere from 2 to 4 a day and having big changes in their brains, like their processing speed of reading comprehension, or scores on those like word games where you guess the words. Can't think of it right now. Maybe I need some Holoimmune. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem to matter for my brain how much I take. But we also have some concussion folks who are taking, they have postconcussive syndromes, and they're trying to figure out how to stop the dizziness and the headaches and things like that. And they're seeing big changes. And so it's fascinating that the strains inside this product are affecting the brain, I believe, through the vagus nerve for these certain populations. And we still don't have a rhyme or reason. And obviously this doesn't treat anything related to that, but I think it's really, really fascinating. Your oxytocin research you brought up earlier, and like, what are we going to learn about these lactobacillus species and the brain in the coming years?
Yeah, totally. Another area that we can talk about is really how lactobacilli are, I like to refer to them as the guardians of humanity. And with respect to Lactobacillus plantarum, that might be considered a star player. I've seen research going back to 2008 and 2012, where it ended up being able to colonize the infant gut and then reduce risk of sepsis, which is a killer. Of course, Lactobacillus plantarum is, I believe, the main bacteria in lacto-fermented vegetables, like sauerkraut. So, this is like a real hero. And we may be doing them damage on a global scale when it comes to environmental toxicity. There's reason to believe this, especially through the bee microbiome research that's being done that showed how microbes are trading amino acids, ending up starving lactobacilli of the tryptophan that they need, and how this might really be related to glyphosate. That's what the research is about, which is an aromatic amino acid inhibitor. That's how it kills weeds. But they never thought about how it affects microbes. Go ahead.
So when you're thinking about this from your angle, having studied bacteria for so long, where do you see paraprobiotics niching in versus probiotics? Like live, like you just said, live Lactobacillus plantarum is really beneficial in some cases. It obviously is surviving some of the stomach acids and the enzymes and things, and doing awesome work. And then dead, heat-killed Lactobacillus plantarum is doing awesome work in the immune system related to, IL-12 and hyaluronic acid reduction in or increase in interferon gamma and some other things. So where are you starting to form opinions about, live versus dead lactobacillus?
Well, even now, you're inspiring me to think of paraprobiotics to be in the category of psychobiotics. In fact, we have someone in the gut club stool test discussion group who immediately felt well-being from a mind standpoint. It's amazing to consider paraprobiotics also psychobiotics, as they're known. Normally we would think of live probiotics to be in that category, but the more I learn about paraprobiotics, the more I see that they're already a part of the pharmaceutical industry as well. These bacterial lysates, these might become a major area of immunomodulation in traditional, in allopathic medicine. I think we're at the beginning of a revolution, basically. I like to think that. But let's find out how far we can get in our lifetime, Steven. It's a tough one. But the more I learn about paraprobiotics, the more impressed I am. And in fact, in holoimmune, another component is the Betaglucan, which is part of the cell wall of fungi. It's also known to be in oats. There's also oat Betaglucan. I just had oatmeal this morning. Anyway, that's
yeah, mushrooms as well. So edible mushrooms, not the well,
yeah.
I'm sure the psychoactive ones probably have some in it as well. But yeah, mushrooms, oats. Yeah.
Yeah. Now in Holoimmune, the Betaglucan is from what species of fungi?
It's yeast. It's Saccharomyces cerevisiae or cerevisiae. I'm not sure how you say
yeah,
it, but it's a yeast extract that they grow.
yeah.
And some people will react to that. I mean, people, there's a lot of like really concerned individuals. There's a lot of like nutritional nerds out there, biohackers who like to research, and I
Hmm.
get it because I've been a researcher and a keyboard warrior since I was little and getting picked
Mm,
on and trying to figure out how to grow muscles and not get picked on. So
mm,
I've been in the bowels of the internet, pun intended, for a long time trying to figure things out. And so people want to argue that, for instance, mushroom beta glucans are safer or better, or oat beta glucans are safer or better. And I don't think the research supports any of that at this moment. I think that
hmm.
we're going to end up finding the same thing we're finding in probiotics and paraprobiotics, which is that they do different things because they have slightly different chemical makeups. And so the 1316 version of the yeast extract in Holoimmune was chosen on purpose because it has the most compounded human research studies on it, and they're all significantly beneficial. And so while some people will argue 13 is better, 16 is better, I don't think we can get that far. And at the end of the day, I'm trying to build products that work. And
Hmm.
the yeast in humans 1316 extract is the one that's been studied the longest.
Okay. A few months ago, we did part one of our talk about paraprobiotics and holoimmune, and there'll be a link to that conversation. But back then, I never considered the beta glucan component of holoimmune to really be a paraprobiotic in and of itself, because there are yeast paraprobiotics uh, in the literature that were found to help with pathogens as far as the vaginal microbiome is concerned. And of course, beta glucan is a very important part of the cell wall of yeast. So, you know, we might have thought that it's more of a prebiotic, or at least I did, a few months ago. But now I'm thinking, you've got 4 paraprobiotics in this product. It's not just 3 plus beta glucan. Um,
Yeah, you were actually the first one to point that out to me.
hmm,
I had not come to that conclusion or had that thought yet, and I think you're 100% right. It's a lysate of the dead cell wall of a fungi, and so I
mhm.
chose it based on the secretory IgA boosting effects that are very durable at 100 milligrams to 250 milligrams. There's 250 milligrams per capsule in our product, so I was really impressed with what the beta glucans could do for athletic performance, for secretory IgA, for immune, just enhancing immunity and possibility, not knowing that I was actually selecting a lysate of a cell wall, and that's how it was working. So thank you for pointing that out.
It's wild. Yeah, I mean, just the beta glucans of the fungi that's from holoimmune in the literature was, I think it was found to control trichomonas in the vaginal microbiome,
Wow.
and they're attributing beta glucan to be a main component of that. Pretty interesting. Why don't
Yeah,
we
there's actually some powerful papers out there for beta glucans where pharmaceutical companies were sort of arguing that it's a pro drug, or it should be maybe potentially in the future classified differently so that they can of course put it behind millions of dollars of research and make it prescription only.
okay, yeah, just the whole area of doing things like patenting microbes. Just by studying them, you can patent a microbe. I don't I don't find that very fair. So, you know, let's share screens once again and take a few minutes and look at some of the literature together and talk about it, and then we'll wrap it up.
Sounds
So,
good.
okay. So this is our first exploration. This is the hub of information that we used back in October.
And I love that. I
I'll go
love
back to
that
it. Okay.
that photo there. It's not about HK 137. It's about MCC 1849. But the mechanism of action is very very similar, if not like really close, in that the literature from the HK137 or LP20 as it's labeled on the bottle is that it boosts IL-12 and interferon gamma. And in this diagram, it kind of shows you like, what does IL-12 do? Why does it actually matter? And in this case, they're kind of walking down a pathway toward more secretory IgA and the helpful elimination of potential bacteria and viruses. But there's other really cool stuff around how IL-12 basically balances Th1 and Th2 over or under production through that native T cell, the helper T cells, basically.
Yeah, and this is taking place in what I mentioned earlier, the lacteals, also known as Peyer's patches. I mean, that's like the center of activity when it comes to our immune system. That's why they say the gut, is 70 to 80% of our immune system. It's taking place right here. So to consider paraprobiotics affecting the Peyer's patches and how immune cells are born is pretty profound stuff. I like to think that we're going to see other types of paraprobiotics. There are bifidobacterium probiotics that, they're not really in the market yet, but, there could end up being Bacteroides paraprobiotics. What have you been seeing? I mean, you chose 3 strains of lactobacillus. Is there any reason you haven't tried, some other types of bacteria for your paraprobiotics?
Well, there's several limitations to what I chose, and remember this started back in I guess early 2020 when everything was kicking off there with the virus, and so I was hyper focused on what had shown in studies in mice and humans any sort of benefit towards viral activity, and so I was hyper focused on paraprobiotic strains and viral activity and good outcomes of some type in one way or the other. So data towards viral activity. And so that sort of limited my search. I wasn't yet really up on paraprobiotics and what they might do for inflammation, obesity, like the LP20 or the HK137 strain we've talked about most of the show. Actually, they did a paper on reducing or supporting metabolic syndrome in humans and how it helps reduce some markers of inflammation in humans. And so I hadn't really grasped yet that we could use paraprobiotics to modify the brain or modify our weight or modify our skin. That's all been coming over the last few years. But then also the really frustrating thing for myself, as well as I'm sure lots of people in the gut club, is that you can find some strain that has like amazing cool data and it will be like absolutely unavailable to you. And so I have listings of like 20, 30 other paraprobiotic strains that have been studied in humans that are not commercially available and that I cannot get access to. I can't get the company to respond to me, or they just don't commercially make it. It's just some researchers killing stuff in the lab. And so I think that's the other frustrating thing. So but in the future, I hope to, and if people have more resources, please reach out to me. I hope to continue paraprobiotics and furthering them commercially, making them commercially available, and hopefully, at some point, being able to run our own studies to see what the combination or the pleiotropic effects of multiple paraprobiotics, because that's never been done before. Holoimmune is the only product that I'm aware of in the world that has more than one paraprobiotic in it.
Okay, interesting. I saw one, I think it was out of Portugal, but I couldn't see a way to even buy it. It had like 17 types of paraprobiotics.
Oh, so, wow, really?
Yeah, I'll send you a link to that, but there was no way to buy it that I saw on the website. I think it was Portugal. We'll check that out a little bit later. So here's a paper about exopolysaccharides. It's taking too long to load. Here it is. Using paraprobiotics in food products, and they talk about things like exopolysaccharides and peptidoglycans. We talked about how paraprobiotics are prepared, resulting in lysates. We talked about L-reuteri raising oxytocin receptors in the brain. This is something that we shared in 2018 on this subject, and this was microbial lysates. doing this. How interesting. I haven't seen a Lactobacillus reuteri paraprobiotic on the market yet. Have you seen that? Because in the autism community, that species has been leaned on pretty heavily because of the research that's mainly in mice, but showing how L. reuteri can attenuate autistic symptoms. So I wonder if this community might be better served by an L. reuteri paraprobiotic.
I mean, I had the same wondering, and I mean, focused on the other things that can be helpful, such as GABA production. I know there's some strains out there that are starting to show beneficial effects for GABA. So yeah, I wonder about creating a product in the future related to L. reuteri and some other species for just those parts of the brain.
Yeah. And if there were such thing as Bacteroides paraprobiotics, I mean, Bacteroides are probably the most powerful immunomodulatory microbe based on what I've seen. They have the ability to, raise IgA, which then results in raised butyrate producing Firmicutes, the Clostridia. So it takes a village. So a Bacteroides paraprobiotic could be really interesting. So here, we see oxytocin levels correlating with the gut microbiome and autism. Interesting stuff. A lot of this research goes back to, again, Susan Erdman. Here's one of the papers where microbial lysate was found to upregulate host oxytocin. Susan Erdman is like a star researcher in this area. This one goes back to 2017. And,
if anybody gets hold of Susan Erdman and can put us in touch, we will provide her all the holoimmune she can test.
Wow. That's a nice offer. We'll send her this video. This paper has some focus on microbial lysates as well. It's paraprobiotics. Oh no, we showed this one already. That's it. There's also LTA that we talked about, lipoteichoic acid. That's interesting stuff, even from a bile acid standpoint. This paper showed how LTA, which is a part of the cell membrane, we saw in the first photo, the LTA of, again, Lactobacillus plantarum, attenuating a viral induced IL-8 production in porcine intestinal epithelial cells. That's interesting stuff. So I never thought about that. LTA as a paraprobiotic. Maybe some of the research I was seeing early on, paraprobiotics were just not a big part of the conversation, as they seem to be gaining a lot of attention. Have you seen a lot of traction over the years? I know the research can go back to 2011, but I mean,
I think it goes back before that, actually, into 2004-ish.
Okay.
But it's been exploding in like sort of an exponential fashion year over year, especially over the last 4 years. Yeah, it's a very exciting new topic. I think you and I are learning as fast as we can, and I think so are the researchers in the companies out there. I think that there's been this, you mentioned it earlier, there was this dominating idea that because the microbiome is so diverse, that the best product is as many billions of strains as you can pack into a capsule or a satchel, and then as many strains. So if you can get 50 strains with 500 billion CFU, then that's the optimal product for an individual. And I think that was the dominating viewpoint for many years. And in clinic, if you talk to many functional and integrative clinicians who are dealing with all different types of things, from autism to IBD to IBS to whatever, that just hasn't worked out.
Yeah.
That thinking is old thinking. It's so is the thinking that like these bugs have to be alive. That's just it's bullshit. It's not true. And they do different things, and we need to evolve our thinking past how many, is there 13 strains and 50 billion CFU? Oh, that's a good product. No, actually that could be harming you. And so I would challenge people to, stop their probiotics and see how they feel after 7 to 10 days. Heck, even stop holoimmune, see if you feel different. You might not. That's okay. But I think where we're moving as the explosion of research happens with paraprobiotics is it's starting to show us that the specific strain and then the aliveness or deadness of it has real specific consequences. And so these catch-all products are on their way out if you're on the forefront of health, and these specific sort of trained products for certain species for certain outcomes are the way to what we're all seeking.
Interesting. You're inspiring a thought that maybe in the future we'll see a paraprobiotic based form of FMT, fecal microbiota transplant, that as a safer route. That could be interesting. I haven't seen that in the literature yet.
I'm not sure. I mean, I think the biggest issue with FMT that I'm aware of is that the humans I think our environment shapes our microbiome way more than anybody wants to talk about, which is why these huge 200 billion CFUs with 50 strains don't work, because you can eat kimchi and get way more than that. You can never beat true life and true environment. And so you can FMT from an Olympic athlete into myself, but if I stay in my same house, if I keep eating my same diet and I don't live where that guy lived or girl lived, and I don't eat anywhere near there or work out, I mean, exercise is a massive modulator of the microbiome that is hardly talked about. If I don't do those things, then my environment slowly changes my microbiome back to some combo of the two, and then the effects fade. And so I think, how do we keep that, how do we change that environment? How can we overcome that environmental difference between the two bodies? I don't know how we'll do that yet.
Yeah. Speaking of exercise, there's a new paper that they showed that raised dopamine was mediated by microbiota in exercise, which gave people more motivation to exercise. Fascinating. I like to think
you can increase your butyrate by exercising.
Okay.
Through the microbiome.
Yeah, just raised oxygenation is interesting. There's some hyperbaric oxygen studies related to microbiota. Anyway, that's a topic for another day. This is the paper I mentioned earlier, where this paraprobiotic activated the pathway that is known to control fungi. Fascinating stuff. Here is the Bifidobacterium paraprobiotic. Well, at least the EPS part of it. There's another paper about an actual bifidum, B. bifidum paraprobiotic.
Yeah, I mean, I think Bifido, as you're mentioning this, I think a Bifido paraprobiotic is probably going to be a pretty amazing product. I haven't seen one yet, but if there is one out there, I'd love to trial it on myself and see what happens.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear you say that. Here's the paper about the B. bifidum paraprobiotic. Maintaining the gut barrier and suppressing, the pathway associated with inflammation.
Yeah.
Wow. That
what
is
year
from
is that? 2022.
Yeah,
Okay.
February 2022. Pretty cool. So yeah, it took me a while to find some of these things. Like that 2011 paper actually, where it showed, this paraprobiotic activating that pathway. I had to search long and hard to find that one, because I had a feeling that paraprobiotics could do that, and this is the only bit of evidence I found for it. Fungi are a tough thing these days. Okay, bacterial lysates as immunotherapies, June 2020. Pretty interesting. A mini review. What's this one? Oh, this is a vaginal species, gasseri, lactobacillus gasseri, in paraprobiotic form.
Yeah, CP2305 has a lot of data on it. It's a pretty cool species.
Okay, I didn't know that. Interesting stuff.
I've run across it quite a bit.
Okay. This is the K8 lysate-induced paraprobiotic that found that it induced outstanding hyaluronin production. That's another way of saying hyaluronic acid.
Yeah, and so if I could ever get the Plantarium K8 into Holoimmune, that'd be awesome. But hopefully someday we're going to do like a K8 study versus like a HK137. This is a cell line study. So like doing a, side by side, which one makes more hyaluronic acid? Do they make more hyaluronic acid? Or is it within 10% of each other? So it doesn't really matter. I mean, I think that's the stuff that is in both live probiotics and paraprobiotics that we still don't quite comprehend, which is same species, different strain. Are the effects multitudes of magnitudes different? Because it certainly seems some strains could be 10 times the power of other strains, but then it seems like there's a grouping like you'd find in a bell curve around certain types of strains that might all do a similar effect, but to get there I think is going to take many years of research.
Okay, I'm intrigued that this is a kimchi derived L. Plantarum, partially because we just started an affiliate relationship with a manufacturer of fermented vegetables that I toured a couple weeks ago in Jacksonville, and I've been enjoying their kimchi. We're offering a discount code for all of my pickle fermented foods, fermented vegetables. Kimchi takes a little bit of effort to make, so for people that don't, have the time to do that, it's a nice option.
Totally.
And it's so delicious. Here's the yeast paraprobiotic study that I found. So how interesting that it had the capability to bind to pathogenic bacteria. Wow. Are they escorting these bacteria out of the body? I've got to dig a little bit deeper. Beneficial effect of heat-killed L. Plantarum 137. This is the strain that's in Holoimmune.
Correct. Yep.
July 2022. So fairly hot off the press. Skin function. What's interesting is that wound healing is also a matter of oxytocin. So it's not just about hyaluronic acid. What's this? This last one we can show now. We've got a couple other photos having to do with oxytocin and Susan Erdman's work going back to 2014. Some nice charts. Oh, this is an abstract about K8 and helping with skin atopic dermatitis in mice. These mice studies are pretty interesting because rodents actually have very, very high levels of lactobacilli in the gut, but ironically, only about 1% in vaginal microbiome studies. So we're very unique. I learned this recently, in preparation for our vaginal microbiome talk, that humans are up to 95% lactobacillus dominant in the vaginal microbiome. And we have, maybe 6% in the small intestine. But in other mammals, it's skyrocketingly high in the colon and the small intestine, but amazingly low in the vaginal microbiome. So it's kind of almost comical that this could be the most unique part of humanity, and that we should be so lactobacillus dominant in that part that's basically the guardians of humanity. So here we are producing the membranes of bacteria in order to signal the immune response. And this includes the response to viruses, according to the research. So a paraprobiotic could be considered treatment and prevention for a lot of things. Prevention is really the key, I think.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's treatment or prevention yet of any one thing, but it will work in conjunction with whatever else you're doing, your exercise routine, your diet, your other supplements. The effect size is powerful, but it's not quite, I don't think we're going to see any quote unquote treatments from the pharmaceutical companies anytime soon that are just a paraprobiotic.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's interesting to know that there's a lot of anecdotal evidence as far as your customers are concerned, and my personal experience is quite positive.
Yeah, we're seeing an immense amount of people who have unexplained rashes or eczema, things like that. That it does appear to be modifying their innate immune system in order to have their skin, despite being on all these topical regimens or all these other regimens, that this product has been a breakthrough for them. Same thing with people who have seasonal allergies or are chronically using antihistamines such as Claritin, that this product is allowing them to bridge off of some of those things and deal with their environment. And then we talked about the brain related stuff earlier. And so, yeah, I just always want to temper people. Number one, I have to, from a legal compliance standpoint, say that this doesn't treat or prevent anything, but also just from a human to human perspective, as someone who's bought a lot of products that didn't work. I don't want people to get outsized ideas about what's possible. And we found that some people respond with 1 capsule, some people respond with a half capsule, and some people need 3 to 4 capsules. And I'm still trying to figure out what's going on there.
Interesting. I think it's like 80 billion CFU per capsule. So that's not a small number.
It's probably more than that. Dead bacteria wise, That's probably 50. No, I think you're right. Yeah, you're close. It's closer to 90.
Okay. Yeah, we don't know exactly how many of those are fragments and whether a fragment would be considered a unit. It might be. Whatever the case, it's interesting to consider that because they are fragments and not live, they may be a safer route for people with an already, an existing sensitive gut. Perhaps safer for those with a histamine reaction. Have you learned anything more about that?
We're seeing very similar things, which is that if someone is in the flare of a histamine reaction or a mast cell activation syndrome fight, that this product is not the first thing you would want to add. First, you want to damper down the histamine expression and the histamine release and improve the breakdown of that histamine. So you want to get out of the acute situation. And then once you're stable using some derivation, usually of like a tributyrin X with like a mast cell stabilizer, like quercetin or Betaglucan or PEA or something like that. Like once you vitamin C, once you kind of have things stabilized, that's one way to live, but you're kind of in a glass house or a glass bubble. You want to go be part of the world. And that next phase of healing for these histamine sensitive folks is where they might introduce something like Holoimmune or a probiotic. And that's where Holoimmune seems to be really helping people tolerate more foods, just tolerate their environment more, live life, with more energy and less brain fog, those types of things.
Yeah. Well, this is Keith Bell from the Gut Club signing out today with Steven Wright from Healthy Gut. Thanks again for joining us, Steven. There's so much to learn and share, and thanks for being our partner in that learning process, but also for putting out some really cool products in the world. So I just want to inspire people to test out Holoimmune. It's pretty, it's a bargain for such a technologically advanced product, and there aren't many choices out there in the marketplace. So this is cool stuff. Also, treat yourself to an Okinawan sweet potato. Why not? Raise your hyaluronic acid this route and live a long, healthy life. Some of the carnivores out there are shaking their heads, but that's okay. All right, Steven, from Palm Beach County with love to California and the family, and I will see you in cyberspace. That's all we can say.
Sounds good, Keith. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for being here. And again, a shout out to Beth. It's great to work with Beth at Healthy Gut. So that's it. Paraprobiotics. Even dead bacteria are good bacteria. Have a great day, everybody.